Let's go back this morning to Exodus chapter 20. We're getting close to the end of our summer study on the Ten Commandments, and today we're on Commandment number 8. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 15. Text simply reads, "You shall not steal." Now, most of us know that it's wrong to take something that belongs to another person. You don't have to go to Sunday school to learn that. It's almost something innate in us as human beings that people have a right to their property. I don't know if you've ever been a victim of stealing. Maybe some of I know some. I do know that some in here have. I don't know that anyone in here has had their home broken into, burglarized while they weren't there, and come home and find things gone and their house ransacked. Or maybe your car. I know of a couple that's had their cars broken into in here. I had my car broken into several years ago. And sometimes, you lose valuables like laptops if you leave them in there and they're gone. But if you've ever experienced that, if you've ever been on the receiving end of a thief, it's not just that you've lost personal property that belongs to you. You feel personally violated. I remember the day I was looking in my car and it was ransacked and things were gone. I had this anger that my personal space had been violated. Several years ago, I was at a Steinmart store in East Memphis, and I was in the line to check out, and this elderly, really petite elderly lady had checked out in front of me and walked out the front doors, and as she stepped off of the sidewalk into the parking lot, a car pulled up, a man jumped out of the car and grabbed her purse and took off, and I will never forget the lady's cry as she came running back into the store. This elderly, tender lady was crying out, "Oh, they've taken my purse, and now they have the keys to my house." And that's what she was worried about. She could replace credit cards and driver's license, but she felt so violated and frightened because now these thieves had the keys to her home, and they knew through her personal identity where she lived. And I remember this righteous anger boiling up in me, and I hope it stayed righteous, but I hope they catch these guys quickly for the sake of this lady's sanity and her peace. Well, guys, these are obvious interpretations and applications of Exodus 20, verse 15. A man can rob a defenseless lady to support a drug habit. Or a man or woman in a $1,000 suit or dress can, over a period of years, embezzle $1 million from their company. And they're both guilty of violating this divine law. As we come to commandment number 8, we're now entering into an area where God invades the mysterious world of our personal relationship to possessions. And there are two assumptions that we've really already drawn from this commandment. One of them is the obvious. It's wrong to steal something that belongs to someone else. And then the other is more implied, and that is our neighbor has a right to possess property. Now, those are the obvious two things that most often people deduce from commandment number 8. You put these two together, and what you come up with is it's wrong in taking because people have a right to possess property. Everybody in this room would agree to that. And we call the bond between a person's possessions, that person and his possessions, we call that ownership. And God expects us to respect that bond. But this morning, I think we're going to, what my hope is take you beyond those two obvious things and to see that the eighth commandment is really, I believe, about the issue of stewardship. Because in reality, God owns everything. Even my body and all the blessings and gifts that are unique to Richard Hall are a gift to me from God. And the same is true with you. You have your body. It's unique. And the gifts and talents that God has given you are unique to you, and God owns those. The Bible says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Paul was teaching the Corinthians that they don't own their bodies. He said, you're not your own. You remember that text in 1 Corinthians chapter 6? You're not your own. You're bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with what? Your bodies. So, even our bodies belong to God. Now, my goal today is to cover 3 general points, and I need to be finished around 11 o'clock because a couple of our elders want to present something to you. So let me move rather quickly through these 3 points. You can follow along in the outline if you want to. First of all, I want to show you several examples of stealing that maybe you've never thought of. So I'm just suggesting it's possible we have violated, or maybe we continue to violate this 8th commandment, and we don't even know we're violating the commandment. So some ways we violate it that we're not familiar with. Secondly, I want us to look at the issue of stewardship just briefly again this morning, which again, I think is the heart of this 8th commandment. And then finally, I want us to look at the positive side. See, we've already mentioned the prohibition, you shall not steal. But every commandment doesn't stop there. It moves to the positive side. See, with the prohibition comes a positive command, and I want to close with that. See, because the 8th commandment not only forbids certain actions, but it asks us, it expects God's people to do something. And I'll close with that. So first of all, some unexpected ways of stealing. And I'll mention one that I think goes on a lot. And that is manipulation. Manipulation is a way of violating this commandment. Random House Dictionary defines manipulation as defines it this way: to influence by artful or devious skills. The Bible says it another way. The Bible calls it stealing another person's heart. Now, there are some positive ways we could do that. We could steal another person's heart. For example, my wife, some 41 years ago, stole this young man's innocent heart. I was just an innocent young man, and she came along and she stole my heart. Well, we look at that in a positive way. She stole my heart, and then we fell in love. But the Bible, when it uses stealing a person's heart, it's usually referring to the negative. That is, there are times when people are taken in by other people. They're duped. They're deceived. They're fooled. They're manipulated. I think of one of my favorite episodes of the Andy Griffith Show, and we've watched this, and you know where I'm going because you probably seen this one. You remember the episode where Barney Fife decided he wanted to buy a car, his first car. Remember that? And the little old the little old lady in a black car from Raleigh came to show Barney her car. And if you saw the episode, Barney ultimately was duped by this lady. You remember he takes everybody out for the evening drive, and it starts clanking and pounding and making strange noises, and then lo and behold, the steering wheel comes up out of the column in his face. Remember that? Perfect example of how someone has manipulated another person. It goes on all the time, not just in the car business, but it goes on in all kinds of different ways. And we can be on the giving end of that. We can be the manipulators. Listen to this. This is from the King James Version. Jeremiah warned God's people, and they will deceive everyone his neighbor and will not speak the truth. They have taught their tongues to speak lies and weary themselves to commit iniquity. It became the pattern of people's lives, the habit of their lives. And let me just say this. If you're sharing half-truths, you are guilty of stealing and lying. Whenever I have to counsel with people, one of the first things I do before I go to that first counseling session is pray this. Father, I pray that you will reveal to me, I don't know what's wrong with the voice. Let me get a drink. But I pray, Father, would you reveal to me the truth? I need to know the whole truth. Not pieces of the truth, but the whole truth. If I'm going to help anyone solve issues and come to some understanding of how they can better their lives and improve, for example, their marriage, I need to know the truth. We're desperate to know the truth. And we live in a world where the truth is often hard to come by. And it becomes a form of stealing because we begin to manipulate people. A few weeks ago, my brother and I visited the National World War II Museum down in New Orleans. And if you've ever been there, you know how the place is laid out, and you have to visit the buildings in order or you'll get out of sequence in the years of World War II. But the first building you visit it just covers the years leading up to World War II. The 1930s and what was going on in Germany, their financial crisis and the rise of Hitler to become president of the company, of the country, and what was going on in Italy and what was going on in Japan. All these issues are covered in that first building. And you see these recordings of Hitler making his fanatical speeches to the people and how this man was so charismatic and deceitful and manipulative to the people. And you realize as you go through this thing, there's no record of Hitler ever taking anyone's life but his own. But he was able, through manipulation, ultimately to cause the death of some 60 million people over this period of 5 or 6 years. Manipulation on a grand scale. And yet, God's people can be guilty of manipulation as well. We're guilty of manipulation when we take advantage of people who are weaker than we. By abusing our power and taking advantage of our position. See, most of us have some kind of position of authority. Whether you're a mom or dad and you have kids who answer to you, or you're a pastor, or you're an elder, or you're a business owner, or you have a position in your company where people are under you, you're a teacher, and on it goes. We have some kind of circle of influence, our circle of authority. We need to be careful as we use our positions that we're not using them in a sinful way to manipulate people in order to get our way. The context here in this commandment, if we jump over to Deuteronomy, where Moses reviews the commandments with Israel, and this is right before Israel is going to go in and possess the land. Israel's going to become powerful. They're going to cross the Jordan, go into the promised land. Of course, Moses can't go. Joshua's going to lead them there, and they're going to become powerful people. God knows it. He knows that as they take over the land, that the abused Israel, the once abused people, could very well become the abusers. That's the context here. And God is warning Israel. Don't steal. Don't manipulate. Don't misuse your authority. Recognize that you're a steward. And everything that you have is a gift from God. Now let me add under manipulation that we can be guilty of letting people manipulate us. sometimes we give up our freedom. I'll give you a couple examples. So many people today have bought into the lies of our culture. The lies put forth by marketing, consumerism, this age of materialism, and couples have been they've allowed themselves to be manipulated by our culture that says the more possessions we have, the happier we'll be. The sooner, the better. And the result often is untenable, unsustainable debt. And debt steals people's freedom. It becomes the bottomless pit for couples. And many have believed the lie that acquiring more and more will bring them happiness. Beware of that. All of us need to beware of that. You know, the real estate crash, the big crash in 2008, and you remember that because many of you lost as much as a half of your retirement funds during those years. The level of greed that led up to that crash is almost unbelievable. And all the blame doesn't lie at Wall Street. Some of the blame lies on Main Street America, where couples said, hey, it's a time where we can buy bigger. And they bought more than they could afford, more than they could keep up. And they bought into that lie, and they suffered for it. Another thing is another way we can manipulate is withholding affection. No hands, please, but have you ever withheld affection from your spouse in order to ultimately get your way? That's a form of stealing. Have I touched a nerve this morning? Let me speak to our wives for a minute, the ladies. I mention this only because I've seen it. Pastoring 25 years, I have seen this. Ladies, wives, be careful you're not guilty of manipulating your husbands by demanding a standard of living that he simply cannot afford. I've seen it happen. And it ends in financial catastrophe for many couples. I'm here to tell you that contentment is never found in moving up. That's a lie. Contentment is a gift. It's only found in the Lord. Through manipulation, we steal our dignity. We steal other people's dignity. We steal our self-esteem. We steal their freedom. We steal their joy. Another way we violate this commandment, and sometimes don't even know it, is through social injustice. If you read the prophets, and some of you are going to be studying the minor prophets this fall on Wednesday nights, they're constantly confronting Israel with their sins. Sins that God had forewarned Israel about. And again, I refer to Deuteronomy. Chapter 4 through 6, you'll see this, where God warns Israel about the time going into their land and the quest for power through exploiting the weak. And Isaiah said this, listen to this, "Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field, till no space is left and you live alone in the world." Listen to Jeremiah. "Woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his countrymen work for nothing, not paying them for their labor." I couldn't help but think of my father's business. We grew up in a retail world. My father owned his own business, and I've shared stories about that before, but I remember often customers would come in, and many of times they were looking for the deal, and you can't blame people for wanting a fair price. But there were a lot of people, they wanted to know what the wholesale was on that refrigerator. And you know, we weren't in the wholesale business. If we sold everything wholesale, we would have gone hungry. And this is the truth. More often than not, it was the Christians, the fellow church members, who would come to my father's store. And because they went to church with us, they expected my father to give them something wholesale. And sometimes he did, out of pressure. And they were taking advantage, you see, through manipulation. And they were stealing the profits that my father deserved to provide for his family and pay his overhead. Not paying them for their labor, Jeremiah says. Jesus said this, he warned those who acted piously while they devoured the houses of widows. Wow. Listen to James. If you're an employer, or maybe you have an influence on the salaries of people that work under you, listen to what James says. The wages withheld from workers cry out, and the cries have reached the ears of the Lord of the Sabbath. All I want to say about that is, people deserve to be paid a fair and right price or wage. I actually, when I have people come to my house, people who I need their help, I need their talents, I need their gifts to help solve a problem at home. If they don't know me, I don't tell them I'm a pastor on the front end. Because I don't want them to think, because I'm a pastor, I expect some kind of break. And if I call Tommy Downs to help me, and he has several times, he'll come. He's never told me no. He's that kind of guy. He always says yes. I always pay Tommy more than what he expects. Because, number one, you pay me a salary. And I ought to want to pay people what they rightly deserve. Sometimes I pay people more than they ask because they've done an exceptional job. That should be our attitude as God's people. Stealing. Sometimes even employees steal from their employers. My brother-in-law retired as executive vice president of operations for Walmart. He spent about 25 years of his life in the company. And he was way up there when he retired. And I double-checked with him when I was writing this sermon just to make sure I had my facts straight. But do you know why they have those little sweet ladies at the front door of the Walmart to greet you when you come in? You know. Because 1 in 50 customers at this Walmart store closest to us in Olive Branch, 1 in 50 customers every day will walk out with merchandise they didn't pay for. But most often, very often, the Walmart loss is not from customers, but from their own employees. It's amazing the amount of merchandise that people who work for Walmart will steal. People will steal from the very company that pays their salary and their benefits. Absolutely amazing. I would say that we have lost our sense of righteousness and justice. The sense of right and wrong is fading in our country. And I'm going to list one more. And I'm not going to have time to finish the sermon because I have committed to giving our elders a few minutes. Let me mention one more way of stealing. Stealing from God. And we can go to the book of Malachi to see this. Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, it's about worship. Really, if you read Malachi, God is indicting the people of Israel because of their worship. They were bringing as sacrifices lambs or rams that were sick, diseased, not the best. They were bringing what they really needed to get rid of. Well, let's bring that. We'll give it to the church, or we'll give it to the Lord. And Malachi, God said this through Malachi, will a man rob God? And yet, God said, you robbed me. But how, the people ask, how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings. Tithes and offerings. Because if you're in a position where, financially, where you say, right now we just can't afford to give. I don't know what anybody gives in this church. That's the truth. I've made that commitment to you many, many times. I never look at giving. I have no idea what people give. I only know what Carla and I give. And so I don't know. But I'm just saying to you, if you're there where you think, I can't right now give, you're in a dangerous area in your life. God, this is one area where God says, test me. Step out on faith. Give me your first fruits. I'll bless you. Now, the other is the danger of being under a curse. Read Malachi 3, 8 through 9. How do you rob me? He says, in tithes and offerings. And then he goes on to say, you are under a curse because you are robbing me. Powerful words. Under a curse? Can God's people be under a curse from God? Absolutely. Now, there are two other areas I'll share with you next Sunday. Hate to end on that note because I always end my sermons on something really uplifting and try to, be gospel centered. So you'll have to come back next Sunday to get that part of it, okay? But I think what the elders have to share with us today, you'll be excited about. And I'm going to turn that over to Wade and Chris Etheridge. They're going to take the rest of the time we have together to share some exciting things with you.